thanks too much. And I hope you all had a wonderful and awesome Thanksgiving. Today we're going to talk about Spec Ops, a game that on the surface looks like a generic military shooter, but in reality it's one of the most realistic and brutal depictions of war seen in a game in quite some time. As a warning, this video will contain some heavy and maybe brutal topics, but I think it's important that we tackle these topics because we rarely see them in games. With that said, let's take a closer look.
What happens when war consumes the soldier? Even when the soldier survives, can they really ever let go of war? What does a warlike environment do to those who are stuck in the middle of it? And how far will you go to justify your actions regardless of how brutal? What happens when war breaks the soldier? And how can war destroy a person without killing them? These are the questions that Spec Ops The Line asks the player. In a world that demands answers for everything, Spec Ops asks extremely tough questions with no definitive answers. Spec Ops The Line was released during a time when modern military shooters were oversaturating the gaming market the same way World War II games once did. So it's no surprise that many people, myself included, decided to pass on this title based on first impressions. But the old saying, never judge a book by its cover, rings true here, as Spec Ops turned out to be one of the most real, unapologetic, and disturbing representations of war seen in video games in quite some time. From the start of its development, the creators talked about how this title would be inspired by themes from Joseph Conrad's classic novel, Heart of Darkness, and Francis Coppola's classic Vietnam War film, Apocalypse Now. If the marketing for this title were a bit more aggressive, the comparison to these classic works of literature and film would have persuaded more people to check out the game when it came out. Spec Ops uses its real-life setting, but fictionalized conflict, to tell a gripping story that sets the player up for heartbreak, failure, and even a deeper look into their own morality. The game starts with an intense helicopter chase scene before the screen goes to white and the words "earlier" appear. The story itself begins as a cliched military shooter, but with a few unique ideas. You play as Captain Martin Walker, commanding a two-man Delta Force squad unit heading to Dubai. Months before Walker's squad arrives, a series of disastrous sandstorms have collapsed the once proud city of Dubai and have forced the inhabitants to evacuate. The American military was sent to assist in the evacuation of the city, but the sandstorms proved a force of nature too strong to handle. America's military is forced to abandon the city, leaving thousands of civilians behind. But one military commander, Colonel Conrad, defies orders and persuades his whole military unit, the 33rd, to stay and not leave civilians behind. As a moral choice, Colonel Conrad's decision makes sense since he wants to do the right thing, and his position as a military commander gives him the power to do just that. As a military strategic choice, it turns into a disaster. The evacuation fails, and months pass by as the city of Dubai goes dark due to more severe sandstorms. But the city's silence is broken when a distress call is sent out. That's when Captain Walker and his Delta Force team come into the picture. The names of your military compatriots are Adams and Lugo, and your orders are simple. Locate the distress call, look for survivors, and then radio HQ for extraction. The city of Dubai looks beautifully post-apocalyptic due to the sandstorms ravaging through every nook and cranny of the city. It almost looks like something straight out of Mad Max. You look for survivors, but the survivors themselves turn out to be hostile, which lead Captain Walker to dig deeper into what's going on in Dubai. But things only get worse, and before long, the 33rd, the same American military unit commanded by Colonel Conrad, also turn out to be hostile, and you find yourself forced to kill American soldiers. This twist is only the first in many ways in which Spec Ops' story defies the cliched American military bravado narrative found in so many other games. This game has a tough and raw message for the player, and it will take the player into extremely uncomfortable places to get that message across. It's a message seen and heard in other classic stories. Anyone who has read Heart of Darkness or seen Apocalypse Now will see the obvious inspiration Spec Ops took from these two forms of powerful media. Anyone paying attention should have figured out that Colonel Conrad in Spec Ops is named after the author of Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad. In the novel Heart of Darkness, you follow a boat captain and ivory trader as he travels down the Congo River while working for the Belgian ivory trade business in the late 1800s. The main character, Charles Marlowe, recounts the brutality he witnesses in his journey and the effects this had both on his psyche and on the psyche of those around him. Apocalypse Now and Spec Ops deal more directly with war, while Heart of Darkness is more about colonization, European colonization to be specific, which in itself is just another form of war, with the big difference in colonization being that the people on the losing side doesn't just lose the war, they lose their land and possibly their culture and identity. As Charles Marlowe travels down the Congo River to link up to the ivory station of a famed man named Kurtz, who is greatly admired by many people in the ivory trade, Charles Marlowe makes intermediate stops in other stations where he witnesses how brutally and unmercifully the Congo natives are treated. The natives are worked to exhaustion by their European conquerors with no care in the world due to their skin color. If they're sick and can't continue to work, they are left to die where they fall. Even going down the Congo River itself takes a toll on the main character's psychological health. The crushing boredom, the insufferable heat, the inadequate technology of the late 1800s makes for a trip that would exhaust even the strongest-willed person, even when nothing's happening. By the time Charles Marlowe finally makes it to Kurtz's ivory station, he has filled his mind with stories of how great this man is, told to him by people in other ivory trading posts who admire Kurtz, and by his own research of the man. He is greeted by a strange man known simply as a harlequin or jester when he arrives at Kurtz's station, who adds fuel to the legend of the greatness that is Mr. Kurtz, treating him like a god. The harlequin talks about how Kurtz saved him and enlightened him, which is both funny and disconcerting. But it doesn't stop there. Charles Marlowe is both amazed and horrified that a whole village of Congo natives worship Kurtz as a god. The reasons why are easy to see. Kurtz treated the natives in the village with respect and dignity, whereas others could care less. It's a story narrative that the movie Apocalypse Now takes and adds the struggle of the Vietnam War. The film is basically Heart of Darkness set in the Vietnam War, and it fits extraordinarily well. The main character, Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, is suffering from PTSD from the beginning of the film. He's a special ops operative who can't let go of war. War has become him. Captain Willard is given an assignment to assassinate another special ops operative, Colonel Kurtz, another homage to Joseph Conrad's novel. Captain Willard goes through a similar journey that Charles Marlowe goes through. Their journey getting to Kurtz on both stories is filled with the same oppressive jungle settings, exposure to the brutality of their respective environments, and odd encounters with strange characters. Even the equivalent of the Harlequin character is seen in Apocalypse Now, in the form of a bizarre reporter/journalist played by the late great Dennis Hopper, who also worships Kurtz. But Apocalypse Now is more than just Heart of Darkness in Vietnam. The film explores the idea of American interventionism and its effects on the American soldier and Vietnamese civilians. There's a scene in the movie where the American military quote-unquote secure a Vietnamese village by ransacking the whole place and intimidating villagers. Naturally, the locals start defending themselves and attack the American soldiers, going as far as to destroy a military helicopter. This is seen as an unprovoked attack by the American soldiers, who now have the justification they need to open fire on civilians. It's a twisted logic that leaves nothing but suffering and death when all is said and done. Spec Ops uses the themes from these classic works of literature and film and modifies them to the environment its story takes place in. Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now are set in mostly jungle environments, but Dubai is all desert thanks to the sandstorms that took place before Captain Walker and his squad come into the picture. However, the psychological effects on the main characters is still the same. The desert environment in Spec Ops is insufferable, and you can almost feel the heat the characters are suffering through. The desert environment in Spec Ops is insufferable, and you can almost feel the heat the characters are going through. The further you get into the game, the more psychologically beat up Captain Walker and his squad become, thanks to the battles they endure and the heat they have to put up with. The desert environment becomes more vital to the story as the game progresses, but Captain Walker and his squad go through hell and back without understanding why the 33rd has gone rogue in Dubai. They battle their way through waves of American soldiers, meeting odd characters along the way, like the Radio Man, who is a homage to the reporter character in Apocalypse Now, and seems to be in league with the 33rd. CIA agents also appeared to help Captain Walker and his squad, but they seem to have ulterior motives for doing so. It all leads to a horrifying mid-game event that pulls the rug from under the player and makes them question whether what they've been doing up to this point has been justified. Now, it's important to note that up to this point in the game, Spec Ops has played as you'd expect from a modern military shooter. You play from the third-person perspective, and you can wield a number of modern military weaponry. It even feels like a run-in-the-mill action shooter sometimes, even going as far as to slow down time every time you get a headshot. What makes this game somewhat stand out from the plethora of other military shooters is the story. You're not shooting locals from the Middle East, you're shooting American soldiers who seem to have gone rogue, and you have no choice but to defend yourself against the hostile forces of the 33rd, who are also eerily called the Damned 33rd. You know things aren't right, but you also don't know what the hell is going on. All you know is that things in Dubai are seriously fucked up. At one point, you even see the 33rd use white phosphorus on locals who have risen up against them and who were apparently aided and armed by the CIA, which by now becomes clear the CIA have their own motives for being in Dubai. Using white phosphorus in real life is considered a serious war crime. So to have the game make you witness this torturous weapon being used on people, regardless of being friendly or not, is a shock to say the least. It makes the player have a gut reaction to the situation, and paints the 33rd as monsters for using such a weapon. The reaction and part of the player is so great that not long after that shocking moment, when Captain Walker has the opportunity to use white phosphorus against the 33rd, the player doesn't think twice. I know I felt justified in using such a weapon because the 33rd used it without mercy, so I would show none in return. I ignored the objections of my squad mates because I felt the 33rd needed a taste of their own medicine. It was one of the few emotional reactions I've had in any game. I wanted to make the 33rd suffer like they made others suffer. The part of the game where you use white phosphorus is eerily quiet for what you're doing. You hear distant screams of calls for help, but you're watching it through a monitor. This is probably the closest experience a normal person will get in experiencing what real-life drone pilots go through when launching missiles from unmanned aircraft against what they hope are enemy forces. Unfortunately for the player and Captain Walker, they have no such luck. When you finish using the white phosphorus against a large group of 33rd soldiers, you are forced to walk through the area you used it in order to proceed. The experience is completely brutal to say the least. Your squad mates comment that they have gone too far as you hear grunts, gurgles, and calls for help from soldiers who aren't quite dead yet. Any player would have second thoughts about the carnage they just created, but you still feel justified because the actions of the 33rd were just as brutal. But that all changes when you make a horrifying revelation. When you reach the end of the area you just bombed, a soldier on his last breath says, "We were helping." With those words, Captain Walker and the player realize what they just did. In the frenzy of war and in the belief of blind righteousness, Captain Walker unknowingly killed 47 innocent civilians. 47 innocent men, women, and children. A horrific scene of a dead mother covering her child's eyes stares back at Captain Walker as Adams and Lugo argue and blame you for not listening and not thinking before acting. It's the only moment in a game when I looked inside myself and I said, "What have I done?"
That hotel back at the storm wall? No, those can't be the civvies that got kidnapped. It's not possible.
Yeah, it is. That's why Gould stormed this place. He didn't want the gig.
He was trying to rescue his people. This is your fault, goddammit! Stop right there, Lugo. What it is? He wouldn't listen! We didn't have a choice! He turned us into fucking killers! That's enough, Sergeant! No! Control yourself! Now!
We need to keep moving.
What?
Reinforcements will be here any second. We need to keep moving.
But Walker, you're not even...
I'm gonna make these bastards pay for what they've done. Now, are you with me or not?
Nay! You're a little
From this moment on, the game takes a completely different tone for the player. Captain Walker puts the blame on the 33rd and the Radio Man for what they have done and vows revenge. But now even the player doesn't trust Walker's motives, and we doubt him just like his squad mates do. It makes you think about the pieces of intel you pick up as you play. Throughout every level, you find intel, which takes shape as various personal objects in the world, and they fill you in on what happened in Dubai both before and during the time Captain Walker and his squad arrived in the city. The pieces of intel paint characters like the Radio Man and Colonel Conrad in a different light than the way they are portrayed in the game. It's not until the very end of the game that you realize why. But before that moment, Captain Walker wants revenge. And unless you plan to shut down your gaming console and never finish the game, you have to go down this fucked up journey with him. That's both the ingenious and the hardship of playing this game. You're barely halfway through when you realize you're not a hero. You just killed a lot of innocent people, but it's unlikely you'll stop playing until you see the whole story through. It's not long after the white phosphorus incident that you realize that Colonel Conrad is watching you after you discover he executed a group of his commanding officers for disobeying orders. As it turns out, Captain Walker and Colonel Conrad have some history together, as they both served in Afghanistan before ending up in Dubai. Unfortunately for Walker, Conrad seems to have gone insane. He forces Walker to execute one of two criminals unless you find a way out of the situation, which is available to you but never explicitly told, making this choice feel a lot more real. Regardless of what you choose to do, the 33rd will still attack you because they see you as murderers for killing 47 civilians, and Conrad seems to be in charge. Now you have a clear antagonist, and it is up to Captain Walker and his squad to stop Conrad and evacuate Dubai before more people die. Not long after surviving Conrad's encounter, you meet up with a man called Riggs, who is working for the CIA. Riggs is a shady character from the start, and seems to actually enjoy the chaos that is happening in Dubai. That alone made me dislike him from the get-go, but as Walker points out, he's the only one in Dubai not trying to kill you, so you pretty much have no choice but to go along with what he says. Riggs plans to take away the 33rd's water supply. The logic Riggs brings up is that Dubai is pretty much a desert, so water is as valuable as gold. He's not wrong, and on this logic, whoever holds the water has the power. You just don't feel comfortable with this logic coming from Riggs' mouth, especially after all that's happened up to this point. But it looks like you have no choice but to follow his lead. So once again, you engage the 33rd, killing more American soldiers as you make your way to the 33rd's water trucks, in order to steal their supply and take away their power. You're warned by Colonel Conrad that Riggs doesn't care about the water, he just wants to bury the truth. But since Conrad is the bad guy, you ignore him and kill wave after wave of American soldiers before finally reaching the water trucks. As you make your getaway, you see Dubai civilians protesting what you're doing. When I saw this, I didn't understand why the citizens of Dubai were so angered by my actions. It was clear by my perspective that Colonel Conrad just wanted complete control over the citizens of Dubai. From my side of things, Conrad went insane. So why are the locals defending this man? Well, after a chase sequence where the 33rd tried but failed to take back the water trucks from Riggs and Walker, I got my answer. Riggs purposely crashes the water trucks, completely destroying the water supply to the entire city of Dubai. An image of Colonel Conrad appears before Walker and tells him that without water, the citizens of Dubai will begin to die of thirst in 4 days. And it's your fault. You did this, not me. Those are Colonel Conrad's words before he walks away. In other words, the player did this. The player just doomed an entire city. As you recover from the crash, you hear the radio man telling the citizens of Dubai the bad news, and you even see a few people scavenging what's left of the water trucks, desperately collecting as much water as they can. Just when you thought things couldn't get any worse, now you're responsible for the death of an entire city. Maybe Colonel Conrad did go insane, but to the people of Dubai, he was a leader, and now I destroyed all the resources they had. You find Riggs close by, and his legs have been crushed by one of the water trucks. It's here that Riggs confesses to Walker that his orders from the CIA were to cover the truth of what happened in Dubai by any means, even if it meant killing an entire city. If the world comes to find out what Conrad has done in Dubai, it means war for the US. a war that the US cannot afford to have, politically speaking. So, with no more water, the people in Dubai will die and no one will know the truth. This revelation is yet another gut punch to the player. You've been had, and another action you thought was righteous turned out to just make things a lot worse. Riggs asks you to give him a quick death, but for the fire of the burning truck he is under, give him a very painful one. I simply walked away. As I did, Riggs kept begging me for a quick death, but I ignored his pleas. Eventually, I could hear his screams of agony as the fire consumed his body, and he dies a very painful death. This was the only decision in the entire game for which I had no regrets, and I still don't. It makes you think about real-world situations and cover-ups. How many times in war have governments tried to bury the truth to avoid greater conflicts? Even if it means sacrificing innocent people. It's happened, but people just don't know how often it happens. So now you're alone and separated from your squad. The Radio Man, now rightfully pissed that the water is gone, helps the 33rd in taking Walker and his squad out, taunting you in the process. Your squad is briefly taken hostage until you help them escape the 33rd by killing even more Americans. Even with all the harm Walker and his squad have done, Walker insists on evacuating the city. Once he reunites with his squad, they plan to storm the HQ of the Radio Man and use his equipment to send a message to all the people of Dubai about an evacuation. An evacuation that's pointless. As you make your way to the Radio Man, he taunts and laughs at you. "What is there to save?" he says. "Your actions pretty much killed the entire city." And he's right. And yet you ignore him because saving these people is the right thing to do, and you're supposed to be the hero, right? You pick up more intel on your way, with one piece in particular being about the Radio Man. You learn his name, Robert Darden, and it turns out that he was trying to do some honest journalism before things in Dubai went to shit. In fact, intel you pick up throughout the game show the Radio Man trying to uncover the truth about the situation in Dubai before the events of the game took place. You hear him confront corrupt politicians and even interview Colonel Conrad about the situation in Dubai, but it seems that now he has gone hostile and supports the apparent war crimes of Colonel Conrad. Once you finally reach the Radio Man in person, he doesn't beg for mercy, he doesn't even flinch when Walker and his squad point their guns at him. He waves a white flag to surrender, but even when he does this, he still takes Walker and his squad as a joke. You know the Radio Man is off, but his calm reaction to this situation bewilders the player as Walker uses his broadcasting equipment to tell Dubai citizens about the evacuation. Eventually, Lugo kills the Radio Man execution style, yet another war crime committed by you and your squad. Adams is furious with Lugo for his actions. "You don't get to make that choice," Adams says as he berates Lugo for murdering the Radio Man. It's been obvious since the white phosphorus incident that the psyche of Walker and his squad have been deteriorating, but now it seems to have reached its breaking point. You escape the Radio Man's HQ via a stolen Black Hawk helicopter, and at this point it would have been easy for Walker and his squad to simply fly away and leave. But instead, Walker wants to send a message and decides to use the helicopter's minigun to see if he can destroy the entire building that served as the Radio Man's HQ. That's literally the only reason why you don't just fly away and get the hell out of Dodge. Walker literally says, "I want to see what this gun can do." And he says it with an enthusiasm of a kid who just found his dad's gun. The player knows Walker's psyche is on the fringe, but by now it seems he actually enjoys inflicting pain, suffering, and death to those he perceives to be his enemies. Walker has turned into a character that the players are no longer comfortable with. He's a war criminal, and to add to his crimes, he destroys the Radio Man's HQ and kills everyone else inside it. This leads to the helicopter chase that opened up the beginning of the game. This action sequence is cut short when a sandstorm forces your helicopters to crash land. Walker wakes up to find he is yet again separated from his squad. By this point in the game, Walker looks like hell, physically, and every time he kills an enemy soldier, he doesn't hide the fact that he enjoys it. They're enemy soldiers. They deserve to die, or so the thought process goes anyway. You are able to save Adams in time, but unfortunately Lugo is not so lucky. As you try to make your way to Lugo, you can hear him screaming for help as angry Dubai civilians know that you and your squad are responsible for killing the whole city and take their anger out on Lugo. You arrive to a horrible scene of Lugo being hanged with Dubai citizens cheering his death. You shoot the rope, and Adams holds back the hostile civilians while Walker tries to resuscitate Lugo, but it's too late. Lugo dies. Adams tells you he can't hold off the civilians for long, and you're given another choice to either scare off the civilians by shooting the air or take revenge for Lugo's death. What's important here from a gaming mechanic perspective is that this choice isn't readily clear. In fact, it seems that the only choice you have is to kill civilians since they're blocking your path. What the game is doing here is seeing if Walker, if the player, can think of an alternative way to solve an extremely volatile situation after an emotional breakdown caused by the death of Lugo. Lugo's death angered me, but I also had the feeling that his death was my fault. After all the damage Walker did in Dubai, how else were the citizens going to react? I didn't want to kill them, so I fired my weapon in the air, and that caused the civilians to scatter. I was momentarily relieved, but now I realized Walker's situation, my situation, the player's situation, was pretty much hopeless. With Lugo dead and the city only days away from dying of thirst, the only thing that Walker and Adams have left is revenge. Revenge against Colonel Conrad for forcing them into the situation that led to the death of Lugo and many innocent civilians. You engage American soldiers in greater and bigger fortified positions to reach Colonel Conrad. By this point, the 33rd are completely terrified of Walker and whatever is left of his squad, so they throw everything they can at you. During this assault, Walker suffers from a hallucination in which Lugo appears before him and blames him for his death. More evidence that Walker has become unhinged. You go through fortified buildings and machine gun bunkers before the 33rd corner Walker and Adams with armed vehicles and helicopters. The 33rd give them one chance to surrender, and while Walker considers this option, Adams refuses to surrender. Walker tries to reason with him, but it seems that Adams' psyche finally broke. He pushes Walker out of the line of fire and makes his last stand. As Walker runs for safety, you hear Adams screaming with American bravado as explosions and bullets whiz past you as you run. Adam dies, and now you're alone. Your last stop is Colonel Conrad himself. You make it to the Burj Khalifa, the real world's tallest building and Dubai's most iconic structure. It serves as Colonel Conrad's base of operations. When you enter the building, you are greeted by a group of soldiers who claim to be whatever is left of the damned 33rd. They surrender to you and point you to Colonel Conrad. The surrender itself is a little off. Something's not right. After all the American soldiers you killed and all the destruction you caused, they simply surrender. There's no begging for mercy, there's no cries for help, nothing. They just surrender. Just a few soldiers saluting you in a show of respect that Walker hasn't earned. On the contrary, everyone should despise him for what he has done. But you don't have time to think about it. Colonel Conrad is only one elevator ride away, which means your revenge is almost complete. You reach Conrad's room as he talks to you about what you think of him and whether Walker thinks he went insane. If you choose to do so, you can explore Conrad's room to find a few of his personal items. And here is where the ending gets real before it even starts. You find intel in the form of a poem Conrad wrote to his wife expressing how much he misses her, and a letter to his son, Jeremy, expressing deep, mournful regret over the stories he will soon hear about his father. These pieces of intel, even more so than any others, really conflict with how Conrad has been portrayed throughout the game. He genuinely seems sorry for the things he has done in Dubai, yet he's tried to kill Walker several times and keep the citizens of Dubai stuck in the ruined city. So, what's going on? This is when the ending starts in earnest. And Jesus Christ, the fucking endings. Not since the original BioShock and BioShock Infinite have I had such a jaw-dropping reaction to how a game so ingeniously wraps everything that has happened. When you confront Colonel Conrad, you find him painting of all things. The painting is almost an exact recreation of the people you killed during the White Phosphorus incident, with an emphasis on the mother and child image that has been burned into the player's memory. Walker defends himself by looking at Conrad and saying, "You did this." But it's not that simple. Conrad tells Walker that it is time for him to know the truth. What truth? Conrad's insane, right? Well, when you follow him to a spinning chair, you are treated to the final revelation of the game. There, in that chair, is Colonel Conrad's dead body. But wait, who the hell is a Conrad speaking to you? And that's when you realize he's not real. Colonel Conrad committed suicide after the initial evacuation of Dubai failed, feeling overwhelming guilt when his orders to stay in Dubai after the sandstorms led to the deaths of many American soldiers and Dubai civilians. He was dead even before Walker and his squad made it to Dubai. After the white phosphorus incident, Walker himself could not handle the guilt of what he did. So, he made up an image of Conrad in his mind to put the blame on him. As your hallucination of Conrad explains this to you, you have flashbacks in earlier situations of the game, this time viewed from the perspective of your squad. Turns out that the walkie-talkie you were using to communicate with Conrad was always broken. It never worked. There was never anyone on the other side of that line. When you were forced to choose by quote-unquote Conrad to execute a prisoner, those were dead bodies you were looking at. Walker, to put it bluntly, went insane with guilt, and that insanity has led to the deaths of countless American soldiers and the destruction of an entire city. Suddenly, everything Walker has done, everything the player has done, comes into question. Walker's illusionary vision of Conrad tells him that none of this would have happened if he just stopped. And he's right. Walker could have stopped when he realized things weren't right in Dubai, but he didn't. He could have stopped when he accidentally killed 47 people with white phosphorus, but he didn't. He even could have stopped when the water trucks were destroyed, but he didn't. I didn't mean to hurt anybody, says a broken Walker when he realizes he has no other defense to justify his actions. But it's actions, not words, that make a man, and Walker's actions have made him into a monster. So then comes the moment of truth. Walker's vision of Conrad points a gun at him and forces him to choose. Will you accept the responsibility of your actions, or will you continue to deny the truth that has been revealed to you? What's great about the endings is that they all make sense, all four of them. If you let the vision of Conrad shoot you, it is implied that Walker committed suicide. Just like the real Conrad, he could not handle the immense guilt that came from his actions. Actions he committed because he wanted to be a hero, but he's not, and Walker couldn't handle the truth. So, he ends his life. If you instead choose to shoot your illusionary vision of Conrad, he breaks into mirror pieces as a metaphor that Walker is able to do the one thing Conrad couldn't. He is able to deny the truth. As Conrad's mirror pieces fall apart, he taunts Walker, telling him not to be too hard on himself since he will most likely go back home and the world will never know what happened in Dubai due to his actions. Lucky him. Walker calls for extraction and the other three endings are available. A group of American soldiers drive up to extract Walker and you can choose how to interact with them. You're armed with an automatic shotgun and the soldiers approach you with extreme caution because you are very shell-shocked. They tell you they are there to help, but you first need to give them your weapon. If you comply, Walker hands over his weapon. No more bloodshed. It's over. As the American soldiers drive you away, one comments how he can't believe you survived everything that happened in Dubai. Walker responds with a solemn, "What makes you think I did?" And he's right. You might have lived through what happened in Dubai, but the war crimes and actions you committed will stay with you for life. You didn't survive. You're scarred for life. Walker will have to live with the guilt of killing innocent people and countless American soldiers, not to mention the deaths of Lugo and Adams. There's no life after Dubai for Walker, just guilt and denial. If you instead decide to shoot the American soldiers, if they kill you, you'll see Walker dying in a pool of his own blood. His madness in Dubai finally brought to an end. As he lays dying, you'll hear a conversation that he and Conrad had during their time in Afghanistan. Conrad tells Walker that soldiers never go home. They do what they are meant to do, and then, if lucky, they die. Finally, if Walker kills all the American soldiers, his madness is complete. He picks up a radio from one of the military vehicles and says, "Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai," one of the first lines Walker said in the beginning of the game. The camera then pans out to a doomed and destroyed city. There is no good ending here. Walker either dies, goes insane, or has to live as a destroyed man for the rest of his life. The endings are complete and tragic, and that's what makes them so memorable. You're not a hero, so the game doesn't end with it patting you on the back. You're a monster, and as such, the endings you choose give you no rewards. It might be a fictional story, but the similarities to the real world are strongly connected. You only need to research how many soldiers suffer from PTSD after their service to see how close this hits to reality. But Spec Ops takes a step further and asks us, are we the heroes? Are we doing the right thing? With real-world current events being the way they are today, these questions are more relevant than ever. Spec Ops' story is fictional, but you only need a few pieces to fall into place to make it a terrible reality, if it hasn't already. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more, please feel free to check out some of my previous work. I promise, not all of it is this deep. I hope to see you all real soon.
Falcon 1, this is Command. Do you copy? We heard shots. Is everything okay? Sergeant Roberts, what is going on?
Gentlemen, welcome to Dubai.